First, I want to thank the South Asia Institute for inviting me to do this talk, and also I'm sorry that the second speaker was not able to come, but that allowed me to also give the second talk, which I have also been working on, Gandhara, and try to tie these things together over a broad area. I want to especially thank Shireen for contacting me and Afzal for inviting me, also Mawish and Gunjan for their extremely insightful art that they made me look at the Indus very differently. So I came down for the opening several weeks ago, a month ago, and it really made me think about how I will present today. So I went and tried to mess around with some of my slides and find a lot more things to put in here, and it's really interesting because Gunjan's presentation already has links with what I'm presenting today, and I hope that I can do this for the second talk as well. To try to link some of the archaeology with the art, because I'm an artist. I grew up painting and doing all kinds of art, and that's what got me interested in technology. My parents were from India, from Indiana, who went to India, so we can add one more network here, from Punjab to India, from India to Punjab to the other side, so from Indiana to India, and my dad grew up in Gary, Indiana, which is not far from here. So basically, there's a big network here that kind of links together. I also want to thank the Departments of Archaeology and Museums in Government of Pakistan and the Archaeological Survey in India for their allowing me to work in both countries, and all my colleagues who have helped me understand the Indus as we've excavated in different sites. Just some background, because I'm an archaeologist, so I have to have chronology, I have to have maps, and I'm going to be showing you some of the background of the important links. So the Indus is actually not by itself. It's surrounded by many other regions that contributed to the Indus. And even though today the Indus civilization is considered to be Pakistan and Afghanistan, it actually reaches to Oman, to Central Asia, to the Deccan region of Central India, to the Himalayas, to Kashmir. It reaches all over what is part of the Central South Asia, so the subcontinent. So talking about it as India or Pakistan is also sometimes hard for me. I want to think about it as a much bigger region. It does develop contemporaneously with ancient Mesopotamia and the Indus and Egypt, but also we see early developments in China that are also developing at about the same time. And earlier scholars used to think that these ancient civilizations were isolated, but they weren't. There were links between them. And I'm not going to get into those as much today, but basically we have to think about the long distance links that link each of the civilizations from China to the Mediterranean. I'm going to start with the earliest phase of development of the Indus of arts, because actually it goes even to the Paleolithic, and I'll bring that up at the end of my talk. But the foundations of urbanism can be traced to when people first began settling down in villages. And the first villages that we see developing are in the area of Mehergarh, which is in Balochistan. It's at the base of the pass. And then also on the other side of the Indus River in a site called Pirana and Kenoyer. These are small settlements that are located on both sides of the Indus River. They were also in the Indus River, but the Indus River has 17 meters of sediment that have filled up over the thousands of years. All those original villages that were in the Indus Valley are buried. So we can't find them. We only find the ones that are outside of the Indus Valley, and people think that they're the center. They weren't the center. The center was the Indus Valley, in my opinion. And I'll show that at Harappa, because we know at Harappa people were living there from about 12,000 years ago. And Harappa just happens to be on the highest part of the Punjab area where it's located. So we know that people were there very, very early. So I'm going to focus on Mehergarh, which has some really good archaeological evidence for some of the early foundations of this art. The earliest occupations were excavated by the French Archaeological Mission with the Department of Archaeology in Pakistan. And they found people living in villages with no pottery. So they had big houses, they had mud brick houses, they buried graves with mud brick walls, but they didn't make pottery. They cooked it, probably roasting their food. They used baskets. You can get hot rocks and roast it in baskets. So basketry was the most important thing. And baskets are the beginnings of eventually pottery. So this is a basket buried with one of the dead at Mehergarh, and ornaments that are brought from many different regions. The foundations of South Asian cuisine are also at this time. So cuisine is an art. It's an art of worshiping your stomach. You have barley, you have wheat, you have sheep, goat, cattle, and lentils and vegetables, and these are the things that the people at Mahadgarh began domesticating and cultivating. We don't know that they used turmeric yet, but I have a feeling that they probably did. We know later on that turmeric became an important spice and part of the development of Asian cuisines, and Harappans were the first to actually develop the use of turmeric very extensively. But here you see impressions of wheat and barley, and we have the figurines of the cattle and sheep and rams, but these figurines are actually a bit later time period. I just threw them in here to illustrate them. The ones from the Neolithic are not very pretty. We also have dates that are being collected from the wild, and those date impressions, seed impressions, are found in the mud bricks, as well as fibers and the leaves of the date palm. The leaves of the date palm become the foundation for baskets. And we see the basketry that's made today in Pakistan and India is based on a lot of the palm and the different grasses that are growing in the environment. You can make baskets out of it, you can make containers to put your dates in. And today you have many different basketry techniques that are done in Pakistan that you can see in markets here, but people, they're made in the homes by the women, and they're traded here and they're sold at a very, very low price. So I would encourage you to go and buy them because they'll help support those craftspeople. And then other women making from willow big baskets for storing fish and other commodities that are sold in the markets. These patterns in the baskets become the geometric patterns that are then painted on pottery. This is called a skeuomorph. A skeuomorph is a symbol taken from one context and put on another context. And so the earliest painted pottery has the patterns of the basketry. The houses at Mahadgarh were made with mud brick, and the mud brick is made with this 1 to 2 to 4 ratio. At first, the 1 ratio is the width of your hand. It also happens to be 4 fingers, which is the foundation of all Indian counting or South Asian counting. 4 angula. If you put your 2 thumbs together, this becomes twice that width. This becomes 8. So 1 to 2, and then you make it 4. That way you have a structure that is solid, can be built very efficiently and then uniformly across the entire Indus Valley. The early bricks at Mahadgarh, some of them were a bit longer. They weren't just 4, some of them were 6. So they didn't have it right down yet. But by the Harappan period, they made that very, very formal. The pottery from Mahadgarh during the later period, once they started making pottery, has a wide range of colors. And some of it is very polychrome. So you have lots of different colors added to it. Many of the colors were done before firing, and then there are colors that are added after firing. You can't get nice blues and greens with natural earth minerals. So at low fire temperature, malachite will turn black. The green will turn black. The blue from lapis will turn black. So you paint those afterwards, and those are called fugitive paints. So we have the pottery painted before firing, and then added colors of blue and green after firing, and sometimes yellows, and these were added after firing. So these are the ones that, this is what they look like without the fugitive paints that have been washed off. We also see a very kind of symbolic structure of designs. Some of it relates to probably clothing and textiles that we don't have preserved, but are geometric, again, the patterns from the baskets. And then we have symbols of fish. The earliest symbols of fish on these pottery, we don't know what the Mahadgarh people thought they meant, but we know from later times that fish become a symbol of fertility and a symbol of the goddess. So fish offerings were given to various deities in later periods, and the fish symbol is something that continues today throughout Pakistan. Even Muslim artists put it on trucks, and I'll show it at the very end. They put 2 fish on a truck, and they have no idea what it means, but it means fertility and benefit and good luck and profit. That this is something that started from this early time period of Mahadgarh. Red ochre, which is the color that was used in the art that Gunjan was talking about. This was used and ground in Mahadgarh to make pigments that would then be used to cover your body, to paint yourself, and then we know that it was put in a part of the hair. Ochre is an insect repellent. So if you put red ochre clay on your body, the bugs won't bite you. If you take red ochre and you coat your baskets, the insects won't eat into the basket. If you coat your hearth or their storage area with red ochre clay, insects won't eat through it. So people realize that ochre is pure, it's purifying, and it is also protective. And this is something that is done, we see from Madagascar at about 3500 BC in the middle of the forehead of a woman, indicating her purity. So in later times, this symbol is done after a woman does the rituals in the morning, worships the deities. She takes the red ochre, she puts it on her forehead. Everybody in the family knows she did the rituals, the family's safe, okay? So that's the origins of these symbols that we see today, and many people don't pay any attention to what they are or what they mean, but that's what they mean. And women today, whether it's in Pakistan, even the Pashtun women put a little dot in their forehead. Bengali women do it. It's all over South Asia. And here we see other figurines with many different styles of hairdressing, and then textiles woven into beads and necklaces and belts, men with turbans. And the textile tradition is something that was really developing in this early time period. And this is one of the most important arts of South Asia, and that's why the colonial powers tried to control South Asia. They came to South Asia to control the textiles. That textile foundation goes back to 7000 BC. The earliest cotton is found at Madagascar at 7000 BC. These are turbans from that the Afghans wear. They're made in Multan. Multan is in the center of Pakistan. They're made of silk, which doesn't grow in Afghanistan. But every Afghan man has to have a silk turban. So they have to trade with these regions to get this material. This is a, This is a silk turban from Sindhu, woven with silver. So the earliest lame, the earliest silver work with textiles came from India. And it was traded to France, it was traded to Europe, and this is one of the main demands of the Indian textile industry. Pattern textiles. This is a figurine from Loralai, Balochistan, which shows beautiful lines on the leg. Now, most archaeologists don't know that women wear susi pajamas or churidars, which are these very tight leggings, and they have to be made from these fine woven textiles. So when this is described by archaeologists, they just say, oh, decorated with little lines. But since I work with textile people in India and Pakistan, I would identify those as a churidar, tight pants made with patterned textile. So this is how I'm linking the crafts of today with the past. We also see a lot of nomadic communities with buttons and things sewn onto their clothing. They can be modern buttons, they can be plastic, they can be whatever, but that also is capturing a tradition that started during the periods of Madagascar. They made geometric buttons, we call them button seals. But these were not just decoration, they were mandalas. Mandala is a pattern that depicts the universe. They depict the four corners of the universe, the complexities of ritual. And when you wear them, they protect you. And how does it protect you? It protects you because any evil influence that tries to come at you gets tangled up in these lines. And that's the concept of these mandalas. So this is important to think about. So these are button seals from Madagascar and Nausharo that I think represent mandalas. Mandalas that would have been used to protect yourself. You can also stamp them in goods. You can use it for trade. You can use it for identity. So that's the foundation from 7,000 to about 4,000 BC. And now we're going to move to Harappa, because Harappa is, at that time period, we have things remaining there. But all this stuff was also happening in the Indus Valley, we just don't have good sites. Harappa is located between the Ravi and the Beas River, two small tributaries of the Indus, in what is now the center of the Punjab. It's a mound that's 17 meters high, and that 17 meters is debris that humans left, built on top of, and built houses on top of until it became this high. The actual ancient land surface of 4,000 BC is right where my arrow is. Can you see my arrow? That's where the land surface was. So Harappa actually was a Pleistocene ridge between two rivers that was the area that didn't get flooded every year. We're seeing 1,000-year floods, 100-year floods. This was a place where 1,000-year floods would not touch. And the rivers were much lower at that time. So people started living here, and we know that from my excavations in Harappa, I have stone tools that we can date to 10,000 to 12,000 years ago also at this site. That means there were Paleolithic people living here, Neolithic people living here, and we just haven't found the village because the site of Harappa is 150 hectares large, and we only found a small part, and we can't remove 17 meters of debris without excavating everything carefully, so we had to look at the edge, and we found the early settlement in one part of the edge. We were very lucky. I dug down a hole in one hole, and I ended up right in the middle of a house. That house had a hearth, a kitchen, everything laying on the floor. Evidently somebody abandoned it, and it got filled with silt, and everything was right where they left it. There were beads on the floor, there were spindle whorls, there were tools for weaving, there was a cooking pot next to the hearth, there were pots sitting in the floor that had not been broken. And so here we have examples of intersecting circle designs. So circles are a symbol of protective power. In later South Asia, when you draw a circle, nothing can go into it. This is when you draw many circles together, that means that it protects the whole pot. When you put your food in that pot and then serve it to your family, everything is pure and protected. So these kind of designs become an important part of ideology, starting from this time period and on until the later Indus period, which I'll show you in a bit. The ideologies that I just explained at Harappa were developing in many places, not just at Harappa, but at sites in what is now India, in Afghanistan, in northern Pakistan, in southern Pakistan. And we see images of deities or water buffalo deities on pottery. This is from Banawali in India, and this is from Kodiji in southern Pakistan. And along with that, we start seeing a very distinctive cooking tradition that uses a very wide-shaped pot that, in my opinion, is also very artistically designed, and it's also optimally designed. It's bottom-heavy, so it doesn't tip over. You can cook on a little wooden stove or a pile of ashes or charcoal, and your food won't fall out. That design still is used today. It's called a handi. And handi is the same type of cooking vessel as used today in India and Pakistan. So that cooking tradition becomes very important for Indus identity. People have to cook in a handi to make the food taste right, to have the culture that they need to perpetuate their daily life and also their ideology. The peepal tree, which is also an important symbol we see in pottery. Peepal is a banyan tree or a wild fig tree, and we see the leaf of the peepal tree in clay. So this is an impression in clay that I found right in the middle of ancient Harappa. So it means that there was a peepal tree living right in the middle of the city. And we know it's found in the Balochistan and other regions. It's found all over. The peepal tree is a sacred spot. It's where you build a shrine. It's where you are protected. And it also has fruit that can be eaten by animals, so it's a very all-around protective type of tree. And it became very important for Indus iconography and design. Textiles. Gunjan talked about textiles, and the Ravi phase, we have the early evidence for different types of weaves. And they liked the patterns so much of the weave that they pressed it into clay and made beads that have the textile impression on it. Now, why do you make a bead with a textile impression? Probably because they made beads that were made with macrame to create macrame beads that are textile beads that they're also very decorative. So this is I'm trying to find evidence for that as well. They also made things from more permanent materials like rock that was found from distant areas. So Harappa is located in the middle of an alluvial plain. The closest rock is 150 kilometers away. That's just for making a grinding stone. These rocks, which are lapis lazuli, comes from over 800 kilometers away in northern Afghanistan. The red rock, which is carnelian, comes from Gujarat, which is another 800 to 1,200 kilometers away. So these rocks were brought from great distances to Harappa, and then they made them into beads right there so they could make them into the styles that they liked. They also brought shell. So the top left photograph is a shell bangles from the coast of Karachi. That's the closest source, 800 kilometers away. And at Harappa, we have evidence for thin bangles and wide bangles. Thin bangles are worn by people who don't have to do heavy labor. Because if you have a thin bangle and you try to chop wood, the chances are it will break. If you have a thick bangle, you can do anything. So thick bangles and thin bangles represent the beginnings of hierarchy in Harappa at about 4,000, where some women were not doing heavy labor and some women were really doing heavy labor. So we begin to see status and hierarchy developing. We also see another ornament, which I think is really wonderful because it's the diagnostic ornament that most people associate with South Asia. It's a tika. So the dot in your forehead is called a tika, but this ornament is called a tika. And this ornament is worn primarily in Punjab and Rajasthan and Sindh, of what is now Pakistan and Western India. You don't see it worn in Bengal. You don't see it worn in South India. It's not worn in the very far north. But this is a clay version found in the Rabi phase, 4,000 years old. We find it in the Kodiji phase, about 2800 BC. This is a woman in Rajasthan wearing one that's almost identical to the clay one that you can see from Harappa. Now, there's no book that says women have to wear this. This is a tradition that's passed down from one generation to the next over thousands of years of ornament that is preferred by communities in certain regions. Textiles are also an important pattern that are preserved and passed on. So this figurine from Harappa dates to 2800 BC. It has fugitive paints that normally they are washed off and we don't see them, but I was excavating and we were able to preserve this and we were able to see that there were pigments. I gave it to our conservators. They were able to preserve it so that it didn't wash off. This is a check pattern. 2 colors of cotton, probably. One could be blue or black, and one could be brown or white. And today, this is called case. So this is a pattern that's still woven today in the Punjab with hand-spun native cotton dyed with indigo, some brown cotton, or you can use katichu, which is a red color, or madder. Women wear it, men wear it. It's used for sheets, it's used for tablecloths. It's a very common pattern still practiced today. And those buttons that I showed you earlier that were made of clay, as you have a city developing, now they start making them out of silver and gold, and then they put them on their clothing. So if you have your clothing covered with silver buttons or gold buttons, it clearly puts you in a different category. One part of Harappa, we found these tiny little buttons on the street in the mud. Now, if you were wearing a gold button dress and you lost some, would you just walk away or would you try to fight? Well, this neighborhood, the people who had that stuff, they didn't bother. If something fell off, they just left it in the street. And the archaeologists found it, and we can say that these people were pretty elite. So they were people wearing very decorative clothing with gold sequins on. Even the animals get covered with beautiful textiles. So in Sindh, it gets cold at night. You don't want your very expensive cattle getting colds and getting sick, so you cover them with textiles. And you make them nice, embroidered with different types of patterns. It's called a rilli pattern. And we have figurines from Harappa that are painted with beautiful designs that are clearly not their natural skin color, and they probably were covered with these types of textiles as well. So this is the next phase that developed what we call the incipient urban period before the Harappan Indus civilization, which dates to 2600 BC. By this time, similar patterns were happening in the south at Mohenjo-daro and Rakhigarhi in what is now India, Haryana, Dholavira, which is on an island, and also in areas of Oman and Iran. So we have this huge area that's interconnected. The city of Harappa, this is a drawing that I did to kind of reconstruct what the ancient city might have looked like, with multiple walled sectors. Each one was a separate political unit, but then they're linked together through marriage alliances and trade. Outside of the gateways, you have caravanserais. So if a trader comes at night and the gates are closed, they can stay in the motel outside the gateway till the morning, and then they can have their goods checked. So this is an example of the urbanism of the Harappan period. This painting was done by a National Geographic artist based on my original. Mine wasn't quite as nice, so he made it a bit nicer for publication in National Geographic. But this is the actual gateway. This is what we found. And all the bricks had been stolen from Harappa. And they were stolen because the British were building a railway from Lahore to Multan over 200 kilometers, and they needed rock. And there's a document that I've seen that argued that it's going to cost 26 cents more to get rocks from the mountains than to take the bricks from the old mountains. So the chief engineers decided you can take the bricks from the mounds. The government approved it, and they hired every villager between Lahore and Multan to loot the ancient cities. So they dug out all the bricks, they crushed it into rock, and they used that to make the railway. Fortunately, they missed parts of it, and they didn't remove this area, and we were able to reconstruct this. Mohenjo-daro is on the other side of the river where there was no railway, and it got saved. So this is a site where we have everything preserved as it was. No railway was built at that time, and the ancient city is laid out, and we can see exactly what it looked like. So we can see brick buildings, wells and latrines and bathing areas, wide streets. But the people who excavated Mohenjo-daro were not good archaeologists at that time. They were good at that time, but they didn't collect the information we want. So we want to know what they were doing in the houses. And in Harappa, since all the walls had been stolen of bricks, we had mud brick structures left, and we were able to excavate inside the rooms and find patterns that relate to what they were actually doing inside them. This is a house at Harappa, and we found many houses at Harappa with hearths, and the hearths are always located in the northeast corner of the house. Now, if you think about it, where does the sunlight come first? The northeast, right? So if you're in the northern hemisphere, when you need to get up in the morning and cook breakfast, the northeast part of your courtyard is going to get the light first, so you're not going to do it in the southwest part. Well, it just so happens that all the rooms at Harappa, the northeast corner is where the cooking areas are. And there are 2 or 3 different hearths. One an oven, one is kind of deep dug in the ground, one is circular, one is square. So I go to the Harappa town, which is next to the site, and guess what? In the northeast corner of the courtyards of every house in Harappa, you have a square hearth, a round hearth, and a tandoor for cooking bread. So similar patterns of cooking are still being practiced today. And the clay plaster is used to plaster it. You replaster it every day. And you can also have movable hearths. So you can put it in a pot and move it around, so you can move it in different areas if it's raining. This pattern is also can be linked to a ideological structure that then becomes codified and preserved in sacred literature. So the Vastu Purana is a sacred text of architecture that was used to develop temples and houses, and the sacred area of the Vastu Purana is the northeast corner, because the demon that is the Vastu is pushed face down on the ground and pinned with various rituals, and the head is in the northeast, the feet are in the southwest. So cemeteries in the Indus Valley are in the south and the west, and clearly the kitchens are in the northeast. So these are important patterns that link also to artwork and temples and architecture that are found in the later time periods. When it comes to ornaments, ornaments become an important way of differentiating people within a city. If you see people wearing certain things, you know immediately who they are, where they're from, what their status is. And these are the very, 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 very wealthy people of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. They had lots of jewelry, beautiful carnelian beads, silver and gold, and very elaborate ornaments. Some of these women clearly went to Mesopotamia, because we have figurines in Mesopotamia of women with headdresses that are very similar to Harappan ones. So it means that these women were powerful enough to be traders. They went to Mesopotamia, they set up their household, and they kept their clothing tradition. Now the men may not have kept their clothing tradition, but the women did. And in South Asia today, if you look around North America, you can identify Indian women or Pakistani women immediately because they still wear saris or pajama or shalwar kameez, whereas the men are all dressed in suits and ties. Okay, so this is a pattern that started in the Indus, and we see it even today. And that tika is still being used. So we see it on Harappan figurines. So it starts from the Ravi, Kotdijian, Harappan period. We can see that continuing. And bangles become even more elaborate. And at this cemetery, I was able to demonstrate that over time, these women in the cemetery, all of them started wearing thin bangles, but over 700 years, the last final burials were wearing bangles that were so thin that you could not have done anything except tell servants what to do. Because they are very, very thin. These bangles are so thin, if you tried to roll a chapati, they would break, okay? So these women in the cemetery I call elite. They are all elite. But this shows that over time, the elite women became more and more elite and less involved in manual labor. And I studied the shell bangle industry by going to Dhaka, going to Calcutta, and studying the places where people were traditionally making them. Because even though shell bangles were used all over India, ivory came in and ivory replaced shell in most places except for certain areas. And this is how they make them today. But shell wasn't the only bangle. We have faience, which is glazed ceramic. We have stoneware, which is high-fired ceramic. And we have plain clay, we have gold, silver, hollow bangles, a whole wide range of ornaments that are clearly linked to these elites. And then we also have figurines of elites of men. They also wear bangles and armbands, some headgear, and some of them had beautiful textiles on their body. This textile was probably red and white and dark green or blue. We have a bangle with that same design on it. And this is the modern kakara design or cloud design that's found in Sindh that has the same pattern that we can see from that time period. These are the modern ones are block printed. The ancient one was possibly applied or painted. Different types of robes and turbans, and then the spinning wheel. So the spinning wheel was invented by the Indus people. Now, spindle whorls, you can spin fibers, and everybody else in the world did it. But in the Indus Valley, we see the first evidence for a spinning wheel. This makes it possible to make very uniform, very quickly, long threads that are very, very fine. And this is a modern spinning wheel used in the Punjab. The only thing that would be preserved archaeologically is the copper spindle. And that's what we find at Harappa. We have found lots of pointed things. They're pointed on both ends, and they would be the spindle for a spinning wheel. And this is the bed that Gunjan showed earlier with the textile impressed on it, which you can measure the weft and warp threads, and there's no lumps. This is not made with a drop spindle. It's made with a spinning wheel. And then what do you do with textiles? Many earlier scholars thought that these large circular platforms at Harappa were working platforms for people to pound grain. They didn't do a very good job of analyzing the material or understanding where you pound grain. If you pound grain inside a closed room, you will die of silicosis. And nobody ever does that, even today. These circular platforms at Harappa were found inside of 4 walls in a very small room, and they were closed. They were dark. They were not out in the open. I re-excavated them to study them and found a dark green stain in the center of the bottom. And I argue that these are probably used to make indigo dye, which has to be done in an anaerobic and a dark condition that does not allow sunlight to come to it. Because indigo is a photosensitive color. As soon as you bring it in the light, it turns blue, and they have to process it in a certain way to get the indigotin out of the plants. And next to those circular platforms was this large building that they also called a granary. We never found any grain in it. We never found any storage containers for grain. I went and excavated it again in certain areas and confirmed that it was not used for grain. And while I was excavating, a gentleman came from a nearby town called Faisalabad. Faisalabad happens to be one of the biggest textile centers in Pakistan. The Punjab is the biggest cotton growing area of South Asia. And he said, wow, those are long rooms. They kind of look like textile mills. This looks like our mill. And when I went to Gujarat, to Bhuj, and I went to this village where the block printers are making textiles, they have long tables and long rooms to lay out their textiles and do the block printing and make the designs on. So I think these are probably textiles, buildings for making textiles and producing this. Textiles become a huge economic benefit for a city. If you can create textiles and sell them, you get a lot of wealth. And this part of the Harappa was one of the wealthiest parts of Harappa. It's where we find hoards of jewelry. And we know that Harappans were exporting textiles to Mesopotamia, and cotton was the main one. The pottery of the Indus Valley is also quite elaborate. These are examples of pottery from the cemetery. And you notice that there are no painted designs on them. So some of the pottery in the cemetery does have painted designs, but it was covered with a red slip to cover the paint. Eventually they started making pottery with no designs and burying that with the dead. And I interpret that as being, you don't put designs of fertility and wealth and well-being with people who are dead. Okay? You just make plain pottery and you put it in the ground because it's an oxymoron. There's people, they're dead, they're not going to have more babies. They don't need this ritual, just make it plain. And so this is the kind of pottery that was put in the later graves. During daily life, we have lots of different aspects of pottery that was made that were for making beer, for cooking, for serving. And these are the decorated pots. This vessel was actually found in the cemetery, but if I turn it around, you'll see that the entire surface is covered with red. The design is covered. We cleaned off half of it so you can see the painted design that was originally on it. So they had to use an old pot that was all decorated, they painted it again, and they fired it and hardened the color so that it would be more permanent. So these designs reflect fertility and benefit. And the dish which you'll see in the exhibit downstairs, I excavated from a house. It shows a peacock. And a peacock is a very important symbol of wealth and fertility. We have circles and dots, and we have a tree, which is also a tree of life. So these are things which are found on pottery. We have the intersecting circle designs here with peacocks above it. And we have similar pottery being made and sent all the way to Oman. So in Oman, we have examples of Harappan people coming there as traders, bringing with them their cooking pots, their serving vessels, their drinking vessels, and their beautiful decorated vessels that they're going to use for probably developing marriage relations with local communities. So these are going to be part of their trade. I've been working with potters, and Muhammad Nawaz was a guy who worked with me first excavating, and then I helped him to replicate pottery, and then over 15 years he became one of the most expert replicators. He unfortunately passed away, and then his son, standing here, is now one of the best potters in Pakistan, making pottery for the Dubai 2021 exhibition. So he just sent a huge shipment down to Karachi that's going off there. So these designs were replicating the Harappan designs, and it's not easy to do. So a lot of artists today try to just use Harappan designs and put it here and there, but just trying to replicate the ancient design is very difficult. And replicating the large techniques for making the pottery is also difficult. It requires understanding different aspects of clay. So I've been working with potters to try to help them understand that. And these potters go down to the Indus Valley School of Art in Karachi. They go to the National College of Arts in Lahore, and they give master classes to the potters in the art institutes to help them understand the foundations of this technology from the Indus civilization. I'm going to end with a few symbols of their religion and ideology. So the writing featured a lot in Gunjan's art. This writing is undeciphered so far, and it's undeciphered because we have never found a bilingual text. Every other culture in the world has bilingual texts. Why don't the Indus? And my feeling is they probably didn't want us to read their writing. Okay? This is between their elites. They wanted to communicate. They didn't want the Mesopotamians to know what they're saying. So they had no need, because this writing was not being used in the same way. And I can't get into a lecture on writing, but we know that the writing is used in the sacred sense, associated with rituals. It's used with a unicorn, which is a mythical animal that was invented by the Harappans. And it's also used for trade. We see symbols of power, deities grabbing tigers, but no humans are ever shown killing other humans in this valley. So they're only shown killing animals or controlling animals. Here is a later depiction of a goddess, Durga, killing a demon, and she is destroying a demon that is itself disrupting the balance of the world. So she is called in because she's the only deity that can destroy this demon. And we see similar patterns in Harappan iconography that we don't necessarily link directly as an ancestor to this, but this concept of ritual being used as a way and depicted on clay is something that we see continuing on in later times. Symbols such as this form, which I call the womb design, and the British called it the kidney design. So they called it because it looks like a kidney. But in looking at designs in South Asia, this design is actually part of a design that is associated with Shashti, the goddess of childbirth. And so this, I argue, is a womb design. And we see it as a womb on this unicorn right here. And it's made in shell, it's made in steatite. We also see, this is that womb design that is painted in a petroglyph that was found from a slightly later period. And then we have the Indus knot designs that are also found. So geometric designs were being used as mandalas during the Indus as well. And then one of the last slides I'll show is the concept of combining humans and animals together. So the Harappans made figurines of humans, they made figurines of animals, and they made figurines of animals with human heads and humans with animal heads. And this one is a tiger man bull figure that is showing the face enraged, and this is the one kind of calm. And I link it to the tiger. So the tiger has a ruff, doesn't have a mane, it has a ruff. And that type of beard is associated with the rulers of South Asia when they wanted to demonstrate their power. Okay? It's a special type of beard that you comb out, make yourself look like a sher. So the word sher means tiger, not lion. Okay? Singha means lion, so sher means tiger. When you have a name Sher Singh, it means tiger lion. And that symbol gets copied into later iconography. It's found in tribal art in central India. It's found carved onto temples of the Jain and later Buddhist period, and also Hindu temples. And we see it even in South India on the top of the most important temple in Madurai, the Meenakshi Devi temple, on the top of the temple. So this is associated with a demon that was created by the god Vishnu to destroy another demon. So the god Vishnu created a demon to kill another demon, and that demon was so big that the demon that he was trying to control fell at the feet of Vishnu and said, I worship you. So now Vishnu had a big bad demon that he didn't know what to do with, and the legend is that he told it to consume itself. So it ate everything up until it came to its head, and it couldn't eat its head. So that head is put on temples, it's put on behind deities to remind any demon that comes by that this guy's still around. Okay? You do not want to mess with the Vishnu or any of the deities. And guess who borrowed that sign? This is the first mosque built in Pakistan, built by one of the rulers of Sindhu in a site called Mansura, Al-Mansura. On the doors of the mosque were these huge door knockers made of bronze, and that symbol is still found even on that. So it's borrowed and used by many different cultures even till later time periods. The concept of yoga is also reflected from the Indus Valley into Buddhism and Jainism. And I won't spend more time on that, but I want to end with just kind of explaining this geometric design. So I didn't want to get into the Paleolithic, but this is a cave painting from Madhya Pradesh, central India, showing a wild bull being hunted by people. It's painted with lots of little lines. No wild bull has those patterns on it. So this is a decorative element to sacralize this bull. We see that on Harappan pottery. And I came to this conclusion by talking to a woman, Ganga Devi. She's from Mithila. She's a woman who paints designs on the inside of this is a wedding chamber. And these are the rangoli or alpana or kolam they call it, rice flour painted designs that are painted to protect a space from evil. The more lines you put, the more protection. Because the evil influence cannot penetrate all of this maze. And that's a concept that I didn't think about until I talked to her when I was working with her at the Smithsonian. So she came to the Smithsonian to demonstrate Mithila painting, and Mithila painting is very famous for its very delicate line work. I also worked with Pakistani truck artists, and I was able to work with Hyder Ali, who's now one of the most famous truck painters in Pakistan. And this is the truck that we made for the Smithsonian outside the Fuhrer Sackler Gallery. And the body maker is Jamiluddin. And helping them design the truck and then figuring out what designs, I started seeing all the connections between modern Pakistani art and that ancient time period. So I showed you the fish plate from Mehergar. Fish are on every truck in Pakistan. Okay? There are geometric designs of intersecting circles. There are all these things. Now, some of them are just because there's fish in the environment, we can make a fish, but why do you have two fish? You know, it definitely links to things that they didn't even know about that are there embedded in what we call deep culture. So it's something that penetrates and spreads throughout a society. So I want to end there that these things continue, and they are a very important part of modern art that we see in South Asia today. Thank you.